everyone. I'm Major Searles with First CAG's Human Dimension podcast. We've got two guests with us today, Major Lopez and Staff Sergeant Buchanan. They're going to talk about some of their experiences within civil affairs. In particular, Major Lopez is going to share about OHDACA, what it is, how he got involved with it, and his recent experiences with it. How are you doing today, Major Lopez?
I'm doing great, Major Searles. Thank you for taking the time. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. Awesome. So I'll just jump right into it. As a civilian, I am a program analyst for Defense Security Cooperation Agency. So it's the DoD agency that houses all security cooperation activities and efforts, and more specifically, oversees the utilization of the OHDACA appropriation, which is the Overseas Humanitarian Disaster and Civic Aid appropriation, which is the money or the funding mechanism which enables DoD to support humanitarian actions or response globally. So whenever we see a CH-53 Ospreys or a MEU responding to a humanitarian crisis, it is this appropriation that actually gives the DoD the authority to employ our resources and our personnel to respond. Personally, I've responded to two separate HADR events as a Marine officer. One was to on Joint Task Force Leeward Islands in 2017, so hurricane response down to the nation of Dominica as well as the island of St. Martin. And in those cases, we as a special MAGTAF were provided OHDACA appropriation to provide very specific capabilities in support of USAID to help respond to the crisis. So we were able to provide heavy lift in support of aid delivery across both islands, as well as the transportation of folks who otherwise didn't have the ability to get out of those islands. Not necessarily a neo, so to speak, but more so just helping those without the means of getting out of the island. So how I ended up working at the SDA and more specifically as one of the program analysts for OHDACA was through my career or my experiences rather as a civil affairs officer in the reserve component. So having the experiences with HADR and then followed with a embassy tour down in Colombia, it set me up to really fall into this role at the SDA. I'm one of those very fortunate people that I get up every day and I enjoy what I do. I help guide policy and direction for DoD when it comes to responding to HADR events and also helping our partners develop HA resiliencies and capabilities so they're not as reliant on the US government in those events. What I've been experiencing a very exciting and interesting nexus recently where what I do as a civilian has been bleeding over into what I do as a civil affairs officer at First CAG, where I've been in a position to help train and teach the OHDACA appropriation and the opportunities that it presents Marines, and specifically with their downrange deployments, where they can add value to those embassy teams and the combat commands by understanding what the appropriation is, looking for opportunities to make nominations, and assisting those combat commands meet their objectives in theater, and then more importantly, just showcasing that Marines are capable of doing something that historically has been the Army's mission. And I know Staff Sergeant Buchanan, he's on the line with us, and he's actually got out and done this on his previous deployment. So he's a perfect example of, he was down supporting a MEU, and there was an opportunity where he could leverage OHDACA appropriation, and by conducting a country program management site visit or site assessment, and he was able to do that. So again, just tying it all back to where we are at now, or where I am at now, is just enjoying the opportunities to train more Marines on this, having them have the better understanding of what they can do so they can make the most of their deployments overseas.
Excellent. Thank you, Major Lopez. It's very informative and will help bring our audience and even the CAG members who listen to this more insight onto what OHDACA is and does. Staff Sergeant Buchanan, would you like to dovetail off of that, or do you want to go into more of your recent experiences on your deployment?
I think I can do both, sir. I went on the 13th Marine Expeditionary Unit 23.1 Westpac tour from the end of 2022 to 23. As a part of that deployment, we concentrated our float plan on 7 different countries. One of them was to participate in the exercise Cobra Gold in Thailand. As a part of that, I worked with the 416th Civil Affairs Battalion. That's Army Reserve Civil Affairs. They were out in country. They participated with us in a pre-planned NEO exercise. And then in conjunction with that, speaking with their civil affairs lead, we discussed what other opportunities we had in the country. And I think that was one of the biggest takeaways of the entire deployment that I had, was that as a civil affairs Marine or officer being deployed, especially with how influence as an MOS is developing, is that a big part of our job is coming into a unit as an individual augmentee. And I was with my amazing boss, Rebecca Demore, Major, First Civil Affairs Group. And she taught me very well that you have to come into the role and you have to find those opportunities as a civil military operations chief or officer to make yourself, I wouldn't say relevant, I'm saying find those opportunities where you need to solve problems, as our CO would say. And so in this case, it was a question of, hey, what are we going to do? And when I spoke to the Army from the 416th, they explained, hey, we're going to be going out to this project that took place a year ago. There was an engineering civic action project where they had built a building attached to a school east of where the primary exercise was taking place. So that had taken place a year before. And now there was an opportunity to go out with the 416th soldiers and evaluate that project. So it was an interesting opportunity. We kind of had to do it ad hoc. So it wasn't planned by anyone above us. So it was very much a ground up plan. I was able to pitch it to my command at the MU. They said, absolutely, not a problem. We went out, were able to see how well that school project was being utilized by that school. And that evaluation is important because, one, it's just good to know for one, and I think Major Lopez could speak to this better than I can, but if you invest in a project, the question is, I think one thing is, hey, how well did we do at that project? And then secondly, did it actually get used the way it's supposed to be used? So in this case, the structure itself was in good condition, which obviously was a good thing for us to find. The second thing was, are they using it? That was not in question here. So this was what I would call a small victory, right? We went out there and we were able to speak with the school staff. They were able to show us pictures. They were able to show us how they use the school on a regular basis. There was no question that it was getting used. That was in contrast to other things I had seen in the AO. So I'd gone to about 5 different countries. The MU itself went to 7 different countries. And while in Indonesia, I saw a project that was well over 10 years old. But that project was obviously, it was another building that was supposed to be a school building as well. And it was no longer used. It was in a part of a town in Indonesia in this one area where they just didn't use it anymore. So that's just an interesting part of our job where you're going to go out, you're going to integrate within an area of operations, you're going to interact with the civil environment, and you're going to start to understand what effect both the DoD or the United States in general is having on that area. And you're going to see how well we're doing. In Thailand's case, I think it was a good example of, hey, following through on an OHDACA project and seeing how effective it was. And in that case, it was. So it was a good practice of civil affairs. And it was a good practice of showing something that we can do. So to Major Lopez's point, the Marine Corps is more than capable of going out and doing something like this. It's not just the Army.
That's great. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. You shared a lot of insights there on not only OHDACA, but your experiences overseas and there with fellow First CAG members. Is there anything else you'd like to add or touch on? Maybe things that might come to mind here now.
Yeah, I think a couple of the key points for civil affairs Marines, something to keep in mind, something for the future as we're moving forward. Deployments are great opportunities to gain experience. That'll probably be one of my big takeaways. The experience can be good, the experience can be bad, but it's a great self-education. This MOS, with the influence field being so small now, but it's growing. If Marines want to gain that experience, they're probably going to have to activate either for short-term exercises or for the longer term. And I think one of the major roles that we're going to hold in the near future, and what I held on the MU, was educating different components of the MU, not just at the staff level, but also at the individual executor level. So that includes those Marines from the BLT, CLB, the ACE, and then also your Navy counterparts. I think that's an important element of it. I think that if we're sending a huge amount of representatives from the United States military, either from boats or special MAGTFs or in whatever form we come into a different country in AO, we need to be educating them on how they're going to be interacting with the civil environment. That's going to change depending on the conflict continuum and where we're at in it. Obviously, being in a shaping environment where we're going into the AO knowing full well that we are trying to build relationships and understand the environment, you want to leave a good impression. I don't think that's emphasized enough for some Marines because they obviously do need to focus on the job that they're being called there to do. And that tends to take up their concentration, but they also need to understand the implications of what it means for them to be there, interacting with partner forces, interacting with the civil environment. I think that's a big piece of what civil affairs brings to the table. It's educating everyone and getting them prepared to be in these environments. I think that was something that, based on my previous training and experience with other civil affairs Marines, that was overlooked. I don't think that was an opportunity that got taken advantage of, but I think that's something we did take advantage of this last bout. And I think that looking down into the future, our MOS as a whole is going to have to, based on my experience and my experience alone, highly consider investing in embedding into the AO for longer periods of time. So ideally in the future, we have more Marines with more exposure during exercises like Cobra Gold and Balcatan, but maybe even longer. So if they are an individual augmentee and they can be in the AO, they're going to do a much better job at not only understanding civil affairs, but then understanding where they're going to have to operate in the future. I think that's a direction that we're going to have to move. I think that is the direction influence is moving, because we need to be educated about where we're operating and then be able to educate the commands and then also the Marines we work with. So I think I will leave it there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it is, about our influence in the AO and how we interact and then building those key relationships. We can get very mission centric and focused as Marines and kind of forget some of the nuances that go into these different operating environments and the cultures and people that live there. So that's a great point. I'm glad you shared that and brought that up here at the end. Um, any save rounds from you, Major Lopez, before we call it a day and move on?
Yeah, nothing to add on my point, on my end. So I appreciate Staff Sergeant's perspective, because I think civil affairs practitioners across the board over the last 5 or 6 years have had that challenge, right? Where commanders don't necessarily understand the value or how to employ civil affairs Marines in the environment, and we're getting better as an organization in finding those people, finding those individuals that understand and are able to communicate that to the staff and also integrate in such a way that we're adding value. Because to Staff Sergeant Buchanan's point, I think most Marine units are hyper focused on that mill to mill engagement, which is super important, especially considering having access in Indo-PACOM and other areas globally. But our piece of it is really the Civ mill, which you can only get access so far with the mill to mill. There's that critical relationship that has to be considered and addressed through the Civ mill lens that civil affairs can bring to light. So it's super important, something that we have to keep striving for, and as professionals, continue to educate ourselves so that we can actually articulate that when we are in the environment and we're explaining what it is that we do and how we add value.
Absolutely. Thank you, Major Lopez, and for your input. All right, gents. Well, hey, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, and have a great weekend.
Thanks for having us, sir. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.